Or Eddie, did you receive the recording? Oh, here we go.
No, I didn't.
Okay, well, the recording has started, so we are going to record this session this morning, everyone.
It has showed up on my screen now. It's also in the chat.
Okay, sounds good. So welcome everyone this beautiful Saskatchewan winter morning. My name is Carla Wiens and I am CEO of the Swift Current and District Chamber of Commerce, and we are absolutely thrilled to present today's session to kick off 2023. Many thanks to the Government of Saskatchewan, Ministry of Immigration and Career Training for sponsoring our session today. We thank you very much. Our local chamber, and indeed all chambers across our province, work tirelessly to foster thriving business communities for all of you. Our recent member surveys indicated that labour market challenges are a top concern faced by employers in Saskatchewan and across the country. Cue the speaker session we are having today. We will have a question and answer session after Eddie's presentation. So please type in your questions at any time into the Q&A section. And my apologies, Heidi, if you could mute your microphone, that would be wonderful. Sorry for the feedback, folks. We are experiencing a little bit of a lag this morning, so we're fingers crossed that the technology doesn't fail us. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Eddie LeMoine. Eddie is a Canadian-born, international award-winning speaker, best-selling author, and employee engagement expert. You will leave today's session energized and with the tools you need to implement change in both your work and your personal lives. Eddie, take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. So I'm actually coming to you from the other side of the country where it's a beautiful sunny day here as well, and I'm absolutely delighted to have this little bit of time with you over the next little while on a topic that is unbelievably popular as we kind of head into 2023. So let's get started. I want to give you a little bit of an agenda on what I'm going to cover off over the next little while. And I want you to ask me a lot of questions at the end. So make sure you put your questions in the Q&A or even in the chat. And at the end, I'll come back and I'll answer all your questions. But here's what I'd like to talk about over this next little while. I want to share with you the trends that are happening in the employment sector in Canada and kind of why you're feeling what you're feeling when it comes down to the skill shortage and what's it going to look like, kind of a year from now or 5 years from now. And is this something temporary or is this something that might even get worse as we head into the future? Now, if anyone is on this call from Atlantic Canada, especially for Newfoundland, you might recognize this next very technical term. It might have been a term your mother or father used when you were growing up. I am literally going to scare the bejeebers out of you. Now, the reason why I want to do that is I really want to inspire you to want to make some changes. It's one thing to know that you have to make some changes, but I want to put a little bit of horsepower behind that on why you should. We'll look at why employee engagement is kind of your best solution as you're heading into the future. We'll look at reasons why people are joining organizations now, reasons why they're staying, and reasons why they're leaving. And the reasons why they're leaving is very different in 2023 than it would have been in 2019. We'll look at the successful attributes of leadership in 2023, and then time permitting, we'll get into a little bit of topic around how do you close that engagement gap. So kind of go from where you are now to where it is you want to go. So you have a path to success. Now, everyone who's on this call has a different path to success. If you're in the public sector, your path to success might be something somebody has to mute. If are you picking that up? If you mute all, I'll unmute myself. Okay, I think we're good. So everyone has a bit of a path to success. Again, if you're in public sector, your path to success might be delivering products or services to the general public. It might be cost containment, delivering projects. If you're in the public sector, it could be profitability. It could be delivering products or services, expansion, and so on. And in order to do that, you need a highly skilled workforce. And that highly skilled workforce is literally going to walk in the door with their own set of values, beliefs, their own personal interests, their own homework balance they're looking for, career goals, safety requirements, and so on. So it looks something like this. You have something you're trying to achieve, some level of maximum results, and your employees show up. We call that area where we intersect with each other as the job. The group I want to talk about today is this group, the group that's absolutely knocking it out of the park in the job market, that are feeling the highest level of job satisfaction from the employers that they're working with. That is the most engaged employees. So I want to share with you how you find them, how you keep them, how you kind of nurture and inspire the people within your organization to have them become more engaged as well. So I love research. I literally spend hours every day researching, and I'm a real numbers guy. And I could probably go toe to toe with anyone in the country when it comes to the impact of the aging demographics or what's happening in the employment sector. But we're going to spend about 90 minutes together. And I don't want you to look like this at the end of the presentation. So I'll probably frame it up in a way that I think you're going to find it relatively interesting. So what are the trends that are going to impact us as we head into 2023? Now, when you look at what happened in the airline industry, even if you look at what happened in the airline industry literally a couple of weeks ago, or literally this morning in the US, where the whole airline sector shut down in the United States for several hours, what we're seeing play out in the airline industry is not an airline issue. It is an employment issue, and it's happening in every industry, in every geographical area across all the G7 countries. So we're seeing it play out on social media because it's such a big deal when it happens and it impacts somebody's vacation or their trip home for Christmas, or they get stranded in another country. But it really isn't that much different than when you go to the emergency department and you have to wait 6 or 7 hours, or it takes you 20 minutes to get a cup of coffee at your favorite coffee shop. So that impact is happening across all industries. So everybody, as we kind of come out of the pandemic, there's two big questions on everyone's mind. And the first question that everyone is asking is, what's it going to look like as we come out of the pandemic? What's the future going to look like? Are we going to go back to some form of what it was back in 2019? And here's what all the experts are saying, and all of the research says: it is never going to go back to the way it was. What has happened is the pandemic was this massive experiment we did at a global level, and everything from online purchasing to working remotely. And it's never going to go back to the way it was. In fact, where we are today, we were going to get there. And we were probably going to get there in about 6 years from where we are right now. But what happened during the pandemic, it really sped up how we got to where we are right now. So I'll go through all of that as we go through our session here today. But the thing that I do want to talk a little bit about is home versus working at the office, and this really impacts a lot of knowledge workers. So anyone or I'll say that initially, it impacts a lot of knowledge workers. So people that could work from home, but may not. But I want to give you a little bit of insight on what the numbers are looking like right now. Right now, across North America, about 50% of the workforce have gone back to work on a full-time basis, the same as it was back in 2019. However, 50% of the workforce are either working remotely or they're working some hybrid model of working remotely, like maybe a couple days that they work at home and a couple days that they work in the office and so on. So it's a little bit of both. We're never going to be able to push it all back in the box again, where everyone simply gets in the car and goes to work every day. And there's a lot of things that are really driving that. But I know some of you are sitting there now and you're saying, well, my people they can't work from home. They turn a wrench, or they serve customers, or they work in the hospitality industry. But here's what I want you to start thinking about. This working from home and remote work is absolutely impacting every industry. And I'll explain kind of why. When you look at your business in the future, you have to look at all of the things that are impacting your business. So that all the people you interact with, whether how you sell your products and services or how you purchase the products and services that goes into what you sell to the general public. But the work from home magnet is pulling people out of industries. And I'll give you an example. In the hospitality industry during the pandemic, about 237,000 people left that industry and are never going to go back to that industry because they moved into other industries where the work environment might be more flexible, where maybe they could work from home. And it's not just working from home. And I'll give you a scenario that happened just recently. One of the big kind of off-road manufacturing facilities, like, you know, the Kawasaki, Honda, one of those manufacturing facilities in the US decided that they needed more people for a particular line. So these are people literally that are turning the wrench. So what they did was they went after a very specific group of people. They went after people that worked in the hospitality industry. But here's what they did different. They offered them a shift that started at 10 o'clock in the morning and finished at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And they paid them $19 an hour. Now, what were they trying to achieve? Well, $19 an hour was significantly more than what they would have been paid in the US working in the hospitality industry. So they could work less hours and still make a good income. But the group they were targeting were parents that wanted to drop their children off at school and pick them up after 2 o'clock at school. But the interesting thing, the manufacturer came back and said it was the most successful shift they've ever implemented in their organization. But they pulled people out of another industry. And that's why, you know, the work from home, and then it's kind of, when I look at it from my scenario, and I talk to executives all over the country, I don't really care what camp you're in, whether you want people to work in your office or you don't. But you truly have to understand when you're recruiting in the future that if you are an only work from the office scenario, then you've cut yourself out of 50% of the market. And when I show you the market, you're going to realize why that's such a big deal as we head into the future. Now, the second question everyone's asking is, where did all the people go? Now, I have to tell you, this is kind of an interesting question because, you know, we're in a chamber event right now. And interestingly enough, just as we were kind of coming out of the pandemic, so I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I was actually at one of the Halifax Chamber meetings. And it was a meeting when we were going to write a letter to the provincial government on things that worked well during the pandemic. So we were going to go around the table, and the very first person that they asked a question, what government programs worked during the pandemic, the very first person, who ran a couple large hotels in downtown Halifax, he said, you know, the wage subsidy program worked. But he said, to be totally truthful, this is a waste of my time. I don't really care what worked last year. What I care about right now is how are we going to ever find some people? And what was really interesting was, as we went around the room and asked people in the room, nobody really cared about what was working last year. Everybody really cared about, what are we going to do this year? What are we going to do to attract people? So just like you're all remotely, that we were kind of a hybrid meeting. We had a group of people in a room, but we had some other folks that were zoomed in, and we had somebody zoomed in from another chamber of commerce in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, and she said, well, where did all the people go? This didn't seem to be a problem in 2019. So what has changed so much now than what it was back in 2019? So I want to share with you where all the people went. So you have a little bit of insight into kind of what has happened over the last little while and where all the people have gone. So for the last 100 years, if you were hiring someone, this is the model that you would hire by. You would have a way of hiring people, like maybe you ran an ad on LinkedIn or Indeed, or you put something in the paper, or you put a billboard outside of your hiring laborers or so on. And you would get a flood of resumes. You would sort through those resumes. You'd find the people that you want to hire. You'd bring them in as junior employees. Some of them you keep, some of them you wouldn't, but over time you would promote them, and they would be mid-level management, technical resources, doctors, nurses, teachers, whatever it happened to be. They would work their way up into senior level, and eventually they would retire. For the last 100 years, the numbers were absolutely in your favor. You could not fail. Here's what's so different right now. This is what the model looks like in Canada right now. So when we look at where we're hiring, there's two places that we're going to hire from. One would be immigrants that are moving into Canada, and the other would be the Z generation that are entering the workforce right now. But interestingly enough, those numbers are very, very small compared to what it was. In fact, I recently was at a session in Northern Alberta, and we talked to some of the employers that were around the table. And they said to me, they said, Eddie, we don't even run ads anymore. I said, why not? They said, because the ads are a waste of money because nobody's applying for jobs anymore. There's nobody in this community to be able to hire. And that's what's so different right now. So if you kind of look at where people are on the employment sector now, we have these new hires, which again would be Z generation and immigration. Millennials are finding their way, and I'm sure lots of you on this call right now are millennials. You're younger, you're managers, you're working your way up in the organizations. In fact, if you Google millennials right now, you'd be hard pressed to find something negative about them. However, if you Google Z generation, they've kind of taken the place of what we used to say about millennials. If we look at the X generation, they promoted themselves into, kind of replacing the baby boomers as they were leaving. I recently spoke at an energy company. There were 450 managers in the room, and 46% of them were X generation. And what I found so fascinating about that is the X generation only make up 22% of the population. So disproportionately, baby boomers tend to promote X generation because they look the closest to them. And then obviously we have the baby boomers head off in their retirement. I'll dig into these numbers just a little bit. But if I go back to this slide, for the last 100 years, you couldn't fail. If you were hiring people, you were a manager, you absolutely could not fail. In this environment that we're at right now, where the numbers are not in your favor and you have no power anymore, it takes a whole different skill. It takes a very different skill to hire, recruit, and retain people when the numbers are not in your favor. And we're going to dig into this a little bit in ways you can, but I want to kind of walk you through how we got here. Now, this is really interesting. I'm in Burlington, Ontario. I'm speaking to a group of executives. I'm leaving Burlington, Ontario, and I'm going back to the airport to fly back home. And I'm listening to Census Canada, and it was right around when they introduced, several months back, that there's a lot of old people in Canada. They said there's a lot of senior citizens in Canada. What I found really interesting was we all knew that. And even the person from Census Canada got a little bit annoyed with the person that was interviewing them and saying, well, we kind of knew this was happening. But the reality is, aging demographics and people leaving the workforce is really not a sexy 4-year election cycle topic. It's not until we get to where it really starts to hit us in the behind that we truly embrace this as a big deal. As you're seeing it play out right now in skill shortages across industries and healthcare sector, I mean, there are provinces in Canada that are 60,000 nurses short. So not, and then I see people celebrating that they hired 5 nurses. So we see, a big disparity on what's happening. But I want to walk you through how we got here. And one of the other things that the lady from Census Canada said in the CBC interview was, baby boomers have not done what they expected to be done. And I want to walk you through how that kind of happened and the impact that's having on everything now, from young people entering the workforce to immigration. So back in the 1950s and 1960s, baby boomers were under the age of 14. Now, we had to build tens of thousands of schools, pediatric wards, baby food manufacturing facilities. Sears came out with a wish book. They put Winnie the Pooh on the front cover. Unless you're a baby boomer, you probably have no idea what I'm even talking about right now. And then something interesting happened in the 1960s that is not happening with the same age group in the workforce right now. So if we were all together in the room, I would ask the baby boomers to stand up. So I would say, if you were born on or before 1964, because that would be the baby boomers, on or before 1964, please stand. Now, interestingly enough, I've been asking that question since 2005 to audiences. And over the years, I've seen less and less. Now, in 2005, if I had a group of managers standing in front of me and I asked the baby boomers to stand up, literally 90% of the room would stand up. But it's not uncommon for me now to be in a room and I ask the baby boomers to stand up, and there are literally none in the room. So we're seeing more and more of them exit the workforce. So I would get all the baby boomers to stand up. And then the question I would ask to all the baby boomers, I would say, if you were the only child growing up, you had no siblings, you were the only child, you can sit down. Now, what's interesting, most baby boomers don't sit down, because most baby boomers come from families much larger than one child. In fact, every baby boomer that would still be standing would represent families larger than we're currently producing in Canada. So currently we produce 1.6 children per one female. And I'd work my way up and work my way up until eventually I'd have over 10. Now, if there's over 10, it's not uncommon they're from the province of Quebec or Newfoundland. They tend to be the larger birth rates in those provinces. But the largest family I've ever encountered, now I have encountered more than that since this one day, was in Lacombe, outside of Red Deer, Alberta. A gentleman stood up and he said, I had 17 siblings. I said, wow, 17 siblings. I said, what was it like growing up with 17 kids in your house? I said, did you have a big house and lots of room? And he goes, no. He said, not at all. He said, actually, he said, we had a very small farmhouse. And I said, well, how did you possibly sleep 17 kids? He said, well, I actually didn't sleep them based on their age. I said, no. I said, well, how'd you do it? He said, we slept them based on their length. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we would sleep 3 long ones up and down in the bed and 2 short ones across the bottom so we can get 5 in a bed. He said, boy, you did not want to be a short one. He said, bathing was not really a thing. We had to bring water in the house to bathe. And I said to him, I said, well, like, when did you move out? And he said, I was 17 years old when I moved out of the house. And I said to him, I said, like, was that like normal or was that early, late? He said, I actually said, Mom and Dad were looking at me, something wrong with this one. Why is he not leaving? So it got me thinking, what is so different about young people entering the workforce now versus baby boomers when they entered the workforce back in the 1960s? So here's what, and I went home. The first thing I thought is maybe I'll go home and I'll kind of ask my daughter some questions. So I walked into the room where my daughter was and I said, Sasha, I said, I'm just curious, when are you leaving? And she looked at me and she said, what do you mean? When I'm not going anywhere tonight? I said, no, not tonight. When are you moving out? And she said, Dad, I never thought about it. She said, did I do something wrong? I said, no, sweetie, I'm just asking some questions. She said, Dad, I never thought about it. She said, really, Dad, like you bought me a car, you paid for the insurance, you put gas in it. If I'm downtown and I'm at a bar and I'm running low on cash, you take your iPhone out and you put money in my bank account. I own every piece of electronics known to man. Mom does the laundry for me. Why on earth would I ever leave? So it got me thinking, when do kids leave and what impact does it have in the job market? So I did a bit of research on this. So up until 2008, if you had at the time, it would have been more of a millennial living with you, they were going to stay with you until they're 24 years old. Now, why is that so different than baby boomers that left on average between the ages of 16 and 17 years old? And the reason why it's so relevant is life expectancy today of a Z generation, when they join your place of employment, is 18 months. So very, very different than baby boomers, because baby boomers might have changed their careers 3 times in their whole life. But here we have a generation that are moving quite a bit. Now, that was very interesting because I was in Ottawa and there was a CEO in a room that I was speaking at, and he put his hand up. He said, Eddie, he said, it's interesting you would say that because he said, when we're hiring people now, he said, we hire them for 2 years. I said, what do you mean 2 years? He said, well, we hire them asking the question, give us 2 years. If you can give us 2 years, we'll work on your resume. We'll even help you find another job if that's what you want. I said, really? So you'd invest time and energy in having someone? Oh, he said, absolutely. He said, but he said, in our heart, he said, we hope they'll stay. And he said, we make it compelling enough that they will stay. But he said, it allows us to bring more people in. But he said what it really does is it ensures that our onboarding is fast, that we get value out of people fast. And I just want to throw this number out there. In your mind, think of a number. You hire someone today. Guess how long, in today's environment, guess how long it is before they have buyer's remorse, that they think that they might have gone to work for the wrong organization. Now, some of you are probably throwing numbers, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months. The number is 53 hours. So you have 53 hours from the time you hire someone to when they start to have buyer's remorse on whether they made a mistake. So those days of hiring someone and say to them, why don't I put you in this office over here and spend a little bit of time on our website and I'll search back around noon and you see if we have any questions. I'll set you up with lunch with Frank tomorrow. He's been here 30 years. He'll be able to answer any of your questions. No, you have to hit the ground running and integrate people into your organization very, very fast. Now, I don't want to depress you. You're sitting out there thinking, oh my goodness, my kids are never going to leave. The most recent data says that if you have a Z generation living with you now, there's a good chance they're going to live with you until they're 33 years old. So I hopefully that's not your case. And my wife and I came up with a great idea. We actually moved out and left the kids at home and moved to Alberta for a while, but that's not probably for everyone. In the 1970s, 1980s, baby boomers started to find their way in the world. They started to get married. For a lot of baby boomers, it was probably the first of several marriages that they may have had. But no, what people weren't really thinking about was what was happening behind the baby boomers. But baby boomers were a very, very interesting lot, and they loved to kind of spend money and buy things. Status symbols were very important for baby boomers. 1980s to 1990s, baby boomers kind of really found their way. They started to become senior executives. But here's what was happening behind, and this is the X generation. First negative growth generation in the history of our country, and it's happened to all the G7 countries. That didn't seem like a big deal at the time in the 1980s, but it is absolutely a big deal today. And I'll show you that as we play this out. In the 1990s to 2000, baby boomers ramped up spending to a whole new level, and something interesting happened. And this was one of the things that the Census Canada people talked about when they were doing the CBC interview, is baby boomers ramped up spending to a whole other level. Like if you go back in the 1980s, 1990s, a lot of folks in Western Canada would relate to this. Baby boomers spent so much money that they drove interest rates into double digits. So the inflation drove in. So when we look at 3/4 of a basis point and that we're seeing now, back then, the interest rates were astronomical. In the 1990s to 2000, baby boomers kind of ramped up their spending, and a lot of people predicted that baby boomers would get rid of their houses and downsize. So move to maybe apartments or condos, and they did for a very short period of time in some parts of Canada, but they didn't like it. And the whole theory was they would get rid of those houses, X generation, top of the Y generation would buy them, and their houses and apartments would be freed up for Z generation and immigration but baby boomers are hanging on to their houses and creating a bit of a housing crisis across Canada. And a lot of baby boomers will not move out of their houses until they're basically taken out of their houses at the end of their life. So we see this housing crisis around something that people predicted wouldn't have happened, that baby boomers would have moved out of their houses. 2000 to 2010, we get a little bit closer to where we are right now. Baby boomers are thinking about going on their well-deserved retirement. You can kind of look behind in the workplace and see there's really not a lot of people coming behind. But if we go out to closer to where we are right now, the population between the ages of 55 and 64, so they're the ones that are exiting the workforce, increases by 73%. The population above the age of 65 increases by 53%, and we don't have anybody coming behind to manage that as we start to head into our well-deserved retirement as a baby boom generation, and hence the pressure you're going to see on healthcare. All of that to say this, I think this is the absolute best time to be alive and working in Canada. I believe the opportunities, when I look at my children who are young adults, they will have opportunities in their life that I could have never have experienced. So, but it also is the time for good leaders. You know, we're not going to reward bad leadership anymore. You're not going to be able to throw people away. The key now is it takes a different skill to manage people in this environment where you have no power anymore, where you're really, it has to be more collaborating and coaching and so on. So let me kind of dig into these numbers a little bit, just so you can have a little bit of an insight into kind of how we got to where we are right now. So if we look at Canadians that are retiring, or Canadians that are hitting the age of 65 years old, we're seeing about 8,500 Canadians a week turn 65 years old. Now, here's you kind of got to dig into these numbers a little bit. Just because you're turning 65 does not necessarily mean you were working or necessarily means that you're retiring. But one of the things we did discover during the pandemic, a lot of more baby boomers at 65 did retire, but also some baby boomers at 64, 63, 62, and so on retired during the pandemic. And one of the reasons for that is they just said, I'm done. I'm done. I don't want this. I don't want to be working from home. I don't feel safe anymore. I'm not going to go to work. Now, we're a very employed country as well. So there's a very good chance of the 8,500 people that are exiting, hitting that 65 years of age every week is probably in the workforce. So we know that that number is relatively large. But let me kind of put this in perspective a little bit. You're driving home from work on Friday, or you might have heard this the other day in the news. Amazon, for example, Amazon is going to lay off 18,000 people globally. So this is not a Canadian thing. This is globally. It's going to impact some Amazon employees in Canada, I'm absolutely sure, but 18,000 globally. In the last 2 weeks, about 17,000 baby boomers retired in Canada alone. So maybe it's not 17, maybe it's 14,000, but the numbers are massive. So during the pandemic, we lost upward of 1 million baby boomers out of the workforce. Now, we're a pretty tiny little country. So when we start losing 1 million highly skilled workers out of the workforce, that's going to have a big impact. So you would say, well, maybe the Z generation will replace that generation. But the numbers of seniors, 65 years of age and older, grow 6 times faster than the Z generation between the ages of 0 and 14 years of age. So we know that we can't replace the baby boomers with our younger population because the numbers don't work, and the baby boomers is just too big of a massive population as they start to head off into their well-deserved retirement. So that was one thing, and this was going to happen anyway, but I think the pandemic probably sped the numbers up a little bit more. But let me dig into some of the other numbers that are happening in Canada, and part of this kind of scare the bejeebers part out of my presentation on why we're feeling what we're feeling right now. So the current jobless rate, this is as of 2 days ago, is 5% in Canada. Other than a little bump where we had it down around 4.9% earlier last year, that's basically the lowest rate we've seen since 1976, since we've been looking at this data. That number is scary, but the number I would be very, very nervous of is the 3.5% in the US. And the reason why I'd be very nervous at that number is the US are coming north of the border to take your people. And they're going to have a way of doing that they've never had before, and it's having a massive impact on our workforce, especially our highly skilled, talented workforce. So attracting talent is becoming every organization's primary concern. And that doesn't matter what part of Canada in or what industry you're in. If you are not feeling it yet, you are going to feel it. And even if we have a recession, I don't think we're going to avoid it this time. It's going to be very different heading into a recession than we would have back in the 1980s. So I want to dig a little bit more into this number just so you can see. So in the first year of the pandemic, we had about 184,000 immigrants move into Canada compared to about 340,000 immigrants that would have moved in the year before in 2019. But the actual fact is there were a tremendous amount of immigrants. Some people estimate around 190,000 immigrants actually exited Canada in that same year to go back with their families so that they wouldn't be in a foreign country during a global pandemic, and they could be closer to their parents and help provide healthcare and so on. So we saw kind of a net zero number. Some people might even think it was a negative 5,000 number. The federal government will tell you about 401,000 immigrants moved into Canada in 2021, but the reality is it's probably closer to 220,000 because the balance of them were already on the ground. We just changed the status. So they weren't actually net new people that moved into the country. Now, you have to look at these numbers with a little bit of a grain of salt, and let me kind of show you how this would work. So we know that we have about 8,500 baby boomers that are exiting the workforce, or 8,500 baby boomers that are turning 65 every single week. So we know a large percentage of them are leaving the workforce. But maybe in your particular company, you find somebody that you need from Bangladesh or China or India or so on, and you bring them into Canada. So you're really happy. You got this great employee, you bring them in. So something happens. When we first bring an immigrant into Canada, a large portion of their paycheck is sent back to their own country, especially if they have a family in their own country. So we have a unification program to bring those people into the country as well. So we bring those people into the country, and that keeps the paycheck in the country. So that's a really good thing. However, think of it like this. You bring one person into work, they bring their spouse in who maybe doesn't speak English yet and is the primary caregiver of their 3 children. So we brought 4 people or 5 people into the country, and one of them is employable. Now, in the long run, this is really good because those young people will enter the education system and graduate and contribute toward the economy. If you were to look south of the border at the US numbers, you'll see a lot more immigrants are coming out of school there. They're a little slightly ahead of us on their philosophy. We kind of suppressed immigration for a number of years. So we're not benefiting from that. So we need more immigration, but the numbers won't offset the baby boomers. So that's why you're seeing with the Z generation and the reduction in immigration, even if we got to 500,000 immigrants a year, which is what the federal government is saying that would happen now, you'll have provinces like Ontario that steps up and says, I want 60% of them. So that's a big chunk of the 500,000. But the other thing that Doug Ford said in the same breath, I'll fix the housing crisis, because that's going to be the big deal. I believe the province that can fix the housing crisis to bring more people into their province will be the one that will win the immigration game as we go forward. None of these numbers scare me as much as this one. Right now, we're about 1 million job vacancies in Canada. That means there's 1 million jobs out there that are not fillable because the people literally don't exist in our country. So this is where the recession plays in. So the theory is that as we raise interest rates, we'll slow the economy down, people will lay people off. But there are a lot of unfilled jobs out there that would have to be absorbed. And there's some industries that this wouldn't even impact, like healthcare and so on, public sector. Like those industries are going to need their people anyway as we head into the future. Again, that number doesn't scare me as much as that next one. The 10.5 million jobs vacancies in the United States, because they're coming north of the border for your people, and they're going to do it a little bit different than they would have done it in the past. So when we talked about this working remotely, hire anywhere, work anywhere. And I'll give you an example. My daughter is a global recruiter. She recruits for a company predominantly out of the US, but also does some work in Europe. She's recruiting 300 people right now. And she will tell me, she'll say, Dad, I don't care where they work. I don't care where they live. She says, as long as they have a good, strong internet connection and they have the talent that we need. So when you're driving down the road today and you see a car in someone's driveway and they're sitting in their house working remotely, not only are they probably not working for somebody in your community, they may not even be working for somebody in your province. They might not even be working for somebody in your country. So I grew up in Atlantic Canada, and that's where I'm at right now. I lived in Western Canada twice in my life, just recently moved back before the pandemic. But I always said there was kind of 3 types of people in Atlantic Canada. You'd have the same, especially in the rural areas throughout Saskatchewan. You have people that when they graduate from school, they fall in love and they move away. They move to the big centers. They move to Toronto, to Vancouver, to Edmonton, and they raise their family there, and you lose them forever. Then you have people that were like me. I would hop on an airplane every Monday morning. I would fly to Mississauga, Ontario, where my office was, and I would fly home every Friday night. But there were always people here that said, I'm not doing it. I don't mind. I'll earn less money. I want to watch my kids play hockey. For me, that's more important. I'm staying here. I'll make less money. I'm okay with that. That is the group everyone is targeting right now. And you have to compete against wages that you've never had to compete against before. And I'll give you an example. Somebody's working here in Atlantic Canada, they're getting paid $90,000 a year, and they're maybe they're a billable resource. They're an accountant or a technical person or a lawyer or something, and they're billing their skill. And I'm going to make these numbers up. They're billing their skills out at $800 a day or $600 a day to the provincial government or $1,200 a day, and the model works. They're making a bit of money. The companies that build them out are making a little bit of money. But what's happening is companies from New York are coming in and saying, you know what? I'll hire you. I'll pay you $200,000 a year, and I'm going to bill you out at $500 an hour remotely. And that's what we're competing against right now. We're competing against what's happening. In fact, I was recently at an event in Edmonton, and somebody said, Eddie, it's interesting you would say this, because we needed a technical resource. He said, we looked all over the place, couldn't find one anywhere in our geographic area. So we started to kind of look outside of the province, outside of the country, found the perfect resource in Australia. It was perfectly fine. They could work remotely. We've learned how to do this over the pandemic. So they put an offer out. Now, some of you on this call will be able to relate to this, and they were ghosted. Now, they were like, I don't understand. We offered them significantly more money than they were currently making. So they kept reaching out and reaching out. Are you going to start? Are you going to sign the offer? And finally they connected. And the gentleman said to the person, they said, look, I am so sorry that I never called you back. To be totally truthful, I'm a little bit embarrassed. Your offer wasn't even in the ballpark. And they said, well, we knew what you were making. We offered you a significant amount of money more than you're currently making. And he said, yeah, no, I know that. He said, another vendor came back, and it was Microsoft. And he said, they offered me $100,000 more than you offered me. They offered me $100,000 signing bonus, and they offered me $700,000 in stock options. Could you have competed with that? And that's the challenge we have now, is that just like it's our benefit that we can hire people anywhere in the world, so can other countries hire people anywhere in the world. And what we're seeing with the skill shortage and the shrinking demographics is happening in all of the G7 countries. So the competition is going to be very, very fierce for immigrant workforce, whether they're inside or outside of our country. And a lot of the other countries kind of want their people back. China wants their people back. India wants their truck drivers back. And if India doesn't want them back, the UK wants them back. You know, we'll be 20,000 truck drivers short by the end of this year. The UK is 90,000 truck drivers short. So again, we can start to see the impact that that is having. So not everyone working in your communities from your community or even doing business in your community. And now you're competing with wages outside of your market, outside of your province, and probably outside of your country. So that is the end of the scare the bejeebers part of my presentation. I want to get into a little bit of solutions now. So I'm going to take just a breath here and a drink. The reason why I drive those numbers home is I want people to understand where we're going. This isn't something that's temporary. People aren't sitting at home. You know, that's a myth. There's a term called the Great Resignation. Some of you heard that, where people are sitting home. That actually didn't happen in Canada. I think if we could put a term on what happened in Canada, it would be the Great Shuffle. We're seeing people moving around, but not people quitting and just sitting at home. I'm sure anecdotally, everyone on this call probably has somebody that they know that might have happened, but statistically, it's not true. In the US, there was what's called a Great Resignation, and they feel they have about 1 million people sitting in the sidelines that they could hire back into the workforce, that they could maybe entice them when their money runs out, they might want to come back into the workforce. We're not seeing that in Canada. So this is real. It's not going to go away. I personally, and again, nobody can predict what's going to happen in the future when it comes to economics. I think anyone who says they could, you would probably want to kind of discount what they're saying right away. But if you look at the numbers, this is very, very different heading into a recession versus, say, back in 2008. 2008, we're heading into a recession. We had about 360,000 unfilled jobs in Canada. Nothing like globally what's happening in the job market. We're heading into this recession with about 1 million unfilled jobs and literally a very, very small workforce. All the baby boomers are still working in 2008. So very, very different scenario as we head into the future. I think some industries are going to get a reprieve. I think some of you that might be in the technology sector, you might be able to pick up some people that you may not have been able to get. But there are other industries that, you know, the people are literally just leaving. So that's going to have a big impact. So let's look at some solutions, things you should be looking at as you kind of head into the future. And the thing that I would really want you to kind of think about is what you're doing to engage your people as you start to head into the future. Now, I believe that every organization, whether you're 5 employees, 50 employees, or 500 employees, should be doing an employee engagement survey in your organization. Now, one time this was a bit of a big deal. You know, you get Gallup or Blessings White or one of the big companies that come in and do, and it was expensive. You simply can buy a copy of SurveyMonkey for I think $500 a year, and it comes basically with one of their built-in surveys as an employee engagement survey. The reason why I believe every organization should be doing an employee engagement survey is that you should have a baseline of the temperature of your employees, like what they're feeling, whether they're happy, what they think about your organization, and so on. And I know what some of you are thinking as you're sitting there right now is, oh my goodness, I couldn't possibly do an employee engagement. I don't want to know, because I don't think I could actually do anything more than I'm already doing right now. And I absolutely feel you. And here's what I would suggest in this scenario is that you do an employee engagement survey, but you're very transparent and you tell your team when you're doing it that we're doing this, just we need a baseline. We need a starting point. We might not be able to do anything about it, but we at least need to know that where everyone stands right now. And this will make all of what we're going to talk about over the next little while. So you're kind of step one, do an employee engagement survey. It doesn't have to be fancy, just do something and do it at least once a year. So if there's an evolution to kind of get to where it is, we went from turn of the century, basically had tyrants running organizations, predominantly men. Before 1935, statistically, there was way more men in the workforce than women. Women entered the workforce after 1935 when men went to war. Many women worked before 1935, but not massive numbers like we're seeing right now. So we went from this tyrant style of leadership that really made unions strong and popular to protect us from this person to a more of a selling style of leadership, which was predominantly driven by baby boomers. Baby boomers, instead of one person making the decisions, they love to have meetings. Those of you that work with baby boomers or are baby boomers, they love meetings. I mean, a baby boomer will literally have a meeting about having a meeting. Let's get together on Wednesday. We'll come up with the agenda for Friday's meeting. So, and then, as baby boomers are exiting and younger people are kind of taking over the reins of running organizations. And that's the other thing that I really want to drive home. Baby boomers had their place, and I am one. So baby boomers had their place. Their management style worked really well for baby boomers. However, as we see more baby boomers exit and the workforce becomes much younger, the style of leadership has to change. It always does. It has to change to suit the environment, the diversity that we have, the two genders, or multi-genders in the scenario now, and a much younger workforce. So we evolved into what was called employee engagement, predominantly driven by organizations like Blessings White and Towers Watson and Gallup. And we know this is rooted in science. I know without a doubt, if I went into your organization right now, we did a survey, looked at your employee engagement number, and if we went back a year later, if we could bump that number up just a little tiny bit, bump it up a little tiny bit, several things will happen. You'll be more profitable, you'll contain costs better, you'll deliver better services, and you'll retain and attract people better. We know that without a doubt, absolutely rooted in science. So it's not a fluffy thing. This is a real science-based. So truly engaged employees mean inclusion and co-creation. What it means is that rather than the tyrant or the handful of people making decisions, we get everyone to make decisions. And we look at inclusion and co-creation in the fact that in one time I would say, really it comes down to the kind of leadership, between leaders and employees. But now if we look at engagement, it comes down to how are you engaging the community? How are you engaging your customers? And how are you engaging your supply chain? So we know that it kind of happens across kind of all levels as we, head into the future. So I'm getting something real wanky happening on the side here on your screen. So I'm hoping that I'm still live. Can I get a thumbs up from someone that I'm still live? I think we're good. I'm back. I see it. Okay. So, oh, I see someone. Am I still here? I'm still here. All right. Good. Thumbs up. All right. So, let me dig into this just a little bit. Kind of why I like employee engagement. One is employees that are more engaged, they're happier, they have better home life balance, they have a clear line of sight between leveraging their individual strengths, the things they love to do at work, and what you're trying to achieve in your organization. So there's that kind of line of sight. From an employer's perspective, you're more profitable, you retain people better, you increase profitability, you give better customer service. From a customer perspective, we have this higher level of customer service, more referrals, and so on. So for me, kind of it's everybody wins as we look at engagement, as one of the solutions. But I want to dig into this just a little bit. Companies in higher levels of engagement. Now, I truly understand that some of you are public sector, so you have to think of this through your, the impact it has on you. So companies that are engaged, and I'll tell you what's really interesting, we've heard this a lot last year when we would get together with executives. In fact, there's a group I speak to of CEOs across Canada and actually into the US as well. And every once in a while, a group of them will bring their companies together. And I was doing one in Western Canada in Calgary. And we had a group of executives. I said, what's keeping you awake at night? And they said, when we win a piece of business now, we don't even think we can deliver it. And then they said, in fact, what we do now is we kind of hide the deals under the deck, where one time we'd ring a bell and run around the office and say, we want a deal, we want a deal. They said, now we're so embarrassed to tell our employees they have to take on more work. So capacity building, getting more out of your team is going to become a bit of a big deal in the future. So 27% higher profits, 50% higher sales, 50% higher customer loyalty, and 38% above average productivity. So cost containment, productivity fits into the public sector, the profitability fits into the private sector. I want to dig a little bit into some numbers and this is really, really critical as you are looking at building capacity as you head into the future. So the term capacity building is something you're going to hear probably for the rest of your careers. And the kind of people that are going to start asking those questions will be the bank. The bank will ask it, investors will ask it, and they're going to want to know, how are you able to deliver products or services now? So how do you build capacity in your organization? There's only a couple ways you can do it. So I'm going to kind of walk you through that. So the numbers I'm going to share with you and the terminology is Gallup's terminology. And the reason, everyone who does an employee engagement survey, it might look a little bit different, or the terminology might be a little bit different, but the reality is it all means the same thing. So some say engaged, not engaged, disengaged, engaged, somewhat engaged. So we'll do Gallup's terminology here. So Gallup will tell you that 59% of the workforce are actually not engaged. So that's not bad. I mean, that doesn't mean that they're not good people, and it doesn't mean they don't put an honest day's work in. They're not your rock stars. They come in, they put an honest day's work in, they're keeping your lights on, they're really helping you move forward, but they're not the people that are absolutely knocking it out of the park for you. This group is knocking it out of the park. 27% of your workforce, when they come to work every day, they're your rock stars. They're knocking it out of the park. They're your best people. You'd love to have more of them, and boy, do you want to hang on to the ones that you have right now. And then we have this other group, this actively disengaged group. They're the people that kind of quit a long time ago, but they're still showing up every Monday morning for work. So I want to dig into this just a little bit so you can understand what this means from a capacity perspective into your organization. So remember that first group, your absolute rock stars, the 27%. They actually do 60% of the total productivity across the board in North America. So think about it. Less than 30% of the total workforce does 60% of the work. Now, many of you are sitting there thinking, yeah, that's about right. If I look at my own organization, there are my go-to people that are really carrying the load right now, that are, you can be a 5-person organization and 2 people are just knocking it out of the park. And that's why you're profitable the way you are today. Now, remember that other group, that 59%, the disengaged group, good people, just not the rock stars. They also do 60% productivity. Now, I know what's happening. Some of you are out there thinking, oh, Eddie, you're blowing it now. There's no such thing as 120% productivity. And I'm sure that, and actually the first time I heard this literally I was in Toronto, 250 accountants in a room. I put this slide up. They all start kind of giggling and looking at each other. And finally somebody puts their hand up and they go, you can't have 120% productivity. So work with me just a little bit here. So what I'm telling you is, for that disengaged group of employees, it literally takes twice as many of them that do the same amount of work as your rock stars, your best employees. But remember that actively disengaged group, that 14%? Well, they actually do negative 20% productivity. That is a group of people that are literally tearing your businesses down, or your employment, whatever it is that you're in. You're tearing your environment down as the rest of the group are trying to build it up. So here's where capacity comes in. As we get pressure on our payroll, the more people that are engaged, the more productivity we get if we were to average the payroll out across. So we did a little bit of digging into this. We used the Association of Financial Officers for the federal government a few years back. Milt Isaacs used to be their president. Milt and I did a little cross-Canada tour, and we did some research using a university in Alberta, and we dug these numbers. So the 27%, the rock stars in your organization, you're getting 90 cents on the dollar from a payroll perspective. Now, that's the best you're going to get out of a human being. So that means they take the odd sick day. They might come in late now and again, the odd time they might be on Facebook. But the reality is they're working hard. They're putting a good day's work in. The only way you could get a dollar for dollar out of an employee is if they weren't real, if they were AI. Because nobody's going to come in and start banging on a keyboard or digging a hole or driving a bus and do it for the 8 hours that they're working. It doesn't work from a human experience perspective. But so there's two numbers you look at: the value they bring and the payroll. So from a payroll perspective, 90 cents on the dollar, value far exceeds what you're paying them. That's where all your profitability is, your customer containment, all of that lies in this group here that are knocking it out of the park. Now, this next group, you're getting about 70 cents in the dollar. So those of you that manage the benefits package in your organization, this group dips into the benefit package a little bit more. They take more time off. They take more sick time. They're more socializing at work, not as focused. Good employees, just not knocking it out of the park. Now, if you worked for me and you came to me and said, Eddie, I need another full-time equivalent, or I need another FTE or for a full-time employee, I would tell you that if you could take 3 people from this group, from this middle group, if you could take 3 of them and push them over into the engaged group, you just got yourself a free head count. You didn't have to hire anyone. What you did was you saved on the payroll and you increased productivity and you built capacity into the group that you already have. But remember that other group at the end? 50 cents in the dollar. You're getting 50 cents in the dollar. So imagine in this tight market where profit and cost containment and delivery is so important, you've got a group of people that literally walk in the door, and you know who they are. They're like, they take every sick day like it's a sense of entitlement. They come in late, they go home early, they use gossip to undermine your success. Now, some of you are sitting there right now, and I know it. Some of you are in a boardroom and you got 2 or 3 people working together, and you've looked at each other and you're giggled. And I know exactly what you've said to each other. You said the name of the person, who that is. So if I was in front of a live audience right now, and I've seen this play out 1,000 times in audiences, especially if you have half round tables, we have companies represented at the table, literally 30% of the room will put the name on the person who is actively disengaged, and you're getting 50 cents in the dollar. So my question for you to think about is, if you know you have someone on staff that you're getting 50 cents in the dollar, why are they still there? And there are a lot of reasons why they might be there. And I'll give you some that play out quite often. One is it can be very expensive to terminate somebody in an organization. I worked at a large aerospace company when I was younger. Bernie used to be our legal counsel. I go to Bernie, I say, Bernie, can I fire so-and-so? And his answer was always the same. Eddie, fire anyone you want. I don't care. He said, you just got to be willing to write that check and have it fall in this quarter. So we know it can be expensive. But there's other reasons why it may happen as well. In some cases, they could be family members. They could literally own the company. We see that a lot in second generation companies. Mom and dad built a very successful business. They pass it down to the siblings, 3 or 4 siblings working together. 2 of them are awesome, love it. One doesn't want to be there, and they're undermining the success of their own organization. And sometimes in public sector and union environments, it literally is impossible to fire someone. Sometimes in public sector, you'd literally have to murder someone to get fired now. And even then, you could probably work remotely from prison. So we know that sometimes are untouchable. So here's what I want you to think about. I want you to manage your best. And here's what you really want to be scared of. And we see this played out a lot, and we've seen it with baby boomer leaders who really have to see their people. They need a bum in a seat to be able to kind of look at them and see that they're working. Nurture your best. Put your policies around your 27%. Get them to help you recruit into that middle 59%. Join the ranks of the very happy, and just minimize the damage that the actively disengaged are doing in your organization. But don't put policies in place to lock them down that might impact your best employees. And I'll give you an example. And you saw this play out on TikTok and Facebook and Twitter over the last little while. When we sent people home to work remotely at the beginning of the pandemic, your best employees at 27%, they worked their little buns off. They went home. They figured it out. They helped. They helped other people in the organization learn how to work remotely. They did what they did when they were on site. They are knocking it out of the park. The disengaged group in the middle, they went home and they put an honest day's work in. They probably worked about the same amount of time they were working when they were on site, but they might walk the dog and do some other stuff but not be 100%. They weren't 100% when they were at work. The actively disengaged, when they went home, they're gaming. They're gaming. They're playing games. They're watching television. But in the reality is they're better at home. At least they're not causing as much trouble when they're at home. But we saw organizations do things like, oh, I'm going to monitor their keystrokes. I want to know what people are doing at home, especially baby boomers would do this. So we're going to put software out there and see whether they're actually working. We're going to make them report what they're doing every hour. And what happened was the best employees got offended. And it started a whole movement called silently quitting. Now, a lot of us that are on this call would know this simply as work the rule. But when you penalize your best employees, they'll come back to you and they'll say, you know what? I'll give you 8 hours. If that's what you want, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get 8 hours. So really look at your best employees and manage them, nurture them, and grow them, and hang on to them, and just minimize the damage that you actively disengage. And I want to dig a little bit into these numbers just so you can get a bit of a perspective. Your best employees, the 27%, traditionally 15% of them would leave you. And normally they would leave you because of reasons, lots of times, literally outside of their own. It's funny, every once in a while you just lose a word. I'll give you an example. You lost someone really good in your organization because their spouse got transferred to another province and they followed their spouse, or a really, really super good opportunity came along and they left. So normally they won't leave. They're pretty loyal, they'll stay. So normally it's about 15%. However, in the last year, this is the group that everyone is targeting, especially from other countries. Because what they're doing is they're able to offer tremendous amounts of money to people that work in this segment. So here's what I want you to be thinking about. If you're losing people that are your very, very best employee to big amounts of money, one of the things you might want to say to them when they're leaving is, look, if you're not happy, we can't match that. Like there are some crazy offers coming in, so we can't match that offer. However, if you get there and you don't like it, give us a call. Maybe we won't be able to work somehow and you can come back. Because a lot of times people are following the money and moving somewhere else, and they're very unhappy when they get there because they loved your place, they loved your job, they loved working with you, but the money was just too much for them not to be able to turn it down. The other thing I would urge you to do is 30 days after they leave is to call them again and say, how's everything going? Are you happy? Because a lot of times people are uncomfortable calling you, but if you reach out to them, you might have an opportunity. And we are seeing people coming back where they said, the money was good, but the job was like 4 levels down from what I'm currently doing. They said it was a VP role, but it's more like a project manager role. So kind of think of it from that type of scenario. Up to 85% of your unengaged employees, so that's that group in the middle, the disengaged group, are actively looking for work right now. So this is up from 55%, and that's why we're seeing the kind of the great movement in Canada. So you really want to target this group to stay and use your best employees and nurture this group and have them move into your best employees, because in that 59%, there are rock stars. And your competition or someone else might hire somebody, and it could be their best employee. And all you had to do was figure out how to turn that group on and get more of them to join the ranks of the happy. So just like you could go into someone else's organization on that disengaged group, bring them into your organization, and they could become a rock star. I mean, think about it. Nobody would ever, kind of look for a job and go in the door wanting to be unengaged. If you hired me, I wouldn't say hire me. I'm going to be the best darn disengaged person you've ever hired. I would want to be engaged, and so do they. You just have to figure out, and they do as well. So a lot of times we work with organizations, we work with both, because I think employees have to understand what their strengths are and how to align them with the goals of their organization and so on. Engaged employees recommend their place as a place to work and a place to do business. This is more critical now than ever. We've seen in cases like in Prince Edward Island, for example, there was a large aerospace company laid off a significant amount of people during the pandemic and lost face in the community. So the community stopped supporting them. Now, during the pandemic, 3 other high-tech companies moved to Prince Edward Island and hired all 200 people that the aerospace company had laid off. And after the pandemic, when the aerospace industry came back, those employees were nowhere to be found. So engaged employees will recommend your place as a place to work and a place to do business. And I'll just throw, the capacity building. This is a big deal. Everyone is really going to start focusing their attention on how to build capacity. And there's another way you can do it. Obviously, productivity in your organization. There is another way, and I'm going to talk on that in just a second. Engaged employees are 5 times less likely to have a safety-related incident at work than a disengaged employee. And if a safety incident happens by a disengaged employee, it's 6 times more expensive. So we can kind of see the value now in moving that engagement number up in your organization. So, just a bit of a recap, get out there, do an engagement survey, go to SurveyMonkey, call us, do something, and do a survey, and then start measuring it year over year and see if you can move that needle up just a little bit more. So I'm on the speaker circuit. I've been speaking professionally since 2005. Last year was literally the busiest year I've ever had in my career. I've done well over 100 flights back and forth across Canada last year. And this is a term I'm hearing on stage a lot from other speakers and organizations. We have to do more with less. And I'm here to tell you it's impossible. You cannot do more with less. Because what happens if that's a philosophy that you have? Think of it in your own perspective. You're in a career that you love. You absolutely love it. You go to work every day. You're leveraging your strengths. You know a clear line of sight between what you're doing, what the goals of the organization is that you're trying to achieve, and everything is doing well. The days are flying by. Somebody gets fired or laid off in the organization, and your boss comes to you and says, "Look, I need you like 25% of the time to take on that other person's role." But that's not your strength. Well, now we've taken 25% of your time doing something that you are a rock star at and asking you to do something that's not productive. And the more we do that in organizations, the more overall productivity drops in an organization. So the real term you should be thinking about is, how do we do less with less with more, or do less with the same people, and kind of get rid of the things that might not help us, so outsourcing them, or maybe should we be looking at technology? So I want to, if we look to the future, if we think about where we are right now, there is only 2 solutions. Well, maybe 3. One solution is to really ramp up the immigration numbers, to be able to get more people to come into the country, to fill the positions as more people exit the workforce, and the productivity of our country continues to grow. You think about it, 1935, predominantly one gender. After 1935, women entered the workforce. When the wars were over, a lot of women exited the workforce, and we had the largest per capita baby boom population in the world. Not the largest baby boom, the largest per capita baby boom. When the baby boomers turned about 14, many of the women entered work again. We now have more women working in Canada than men, and we're seeing the baby boomers go. That growth came from adding a gender and adding a baby boom generation. So growth now has to come from immigration or increasing productivity or capacity in our organizations. There's kind of 3 things we can look at. One, ramp up the immigration numbers. Number two, technology. Number three, maybe cloning 14-year-old children. I'm not really sure if that's something we can do yet. But let me look a little bit into the technology perspective. So the Economic Forum estimates that machines will replace about 85 million jobs with AI by 2025. So despite the misconceptions, AI may prompt a considerable spike in new positions. So the question now isn't whether we use AI, it's whether we use AI in an organization in a way that enhances the workforce. So a lot of experts believe that we can replace 40% of all employees in 10 years with the use of AI. Now, some of you might have been watching a little bit this play out on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram over the last probably 6 weeks in a chat bot that you can actually go in and have it do AI work for you. So in my organization, we're using AI every single day. And what it does is it's almost like we've hired a couple extra people that can do work for us. And I'll give you an example. Just before, let me just do one more thing. But just before we did this session today, I asked AI a question and asked it to produce something for me. But here's what I want you to think about. There are 3 areas in your organization you should be looking at automating as you want to build capacity in the future. First thing, dirty jobs. If you've got dirty jobs out there that nobody wants to do, you might want to look at finding ways to automate those. The second thing is dangerous jobs, because you're going to lose people who don't want to be doing dirty jobs, and you're going to lose people who don't want to be doing dangerous jobs. But in my kind of neck of the woods, what I spend my career on is engagement. So the other area you want to look at automating in your organization are tasks within your organization that are disengaging. So here's the question I asked AI this morning. Write a few lines on why AI helps to increase employee engagement. I'm going to get a little close to my camera here because my screen is behind the camera. So this response I got in 3 seconds. So we're using AI right now to write ad copy for us, not finished ad copy, but to write first draft ad copy. We then take that ad copy and we put it in another program and we massage it and work with it. But if you have writer's block or you don't know how to do something, you can ask AI a question and it will give you an answer. It's not like Google. It literally will do what you ask it to do. So this is a response I got in 3 seconds. AI can help increase employee engagement by automating repetitive and mundane tasks, allowing employees to focus on more engaging and meaningful work. Additionally, AI can assist with personalizing employees' experiments and providing support, leading to increased job satisfaction and motivation. By using AI to enhance the employee experience, companies can foster a more engaged and productive workforce. It was 3 seconds. It would have taken me an hour to put something so articulately said. So you really want to be looking at AI right now in your organization because it is one of the easiest ways to build capacity without adding to your employees. Find the task that can be offhanded to AI as you head into the future. So I get a lot of questions from people. One is, Eddie, what's more important, culture or strategy? And it probably depends who you're talking to. The accountants will tell you it's strategy. The human resource people will tell you it's culture. But the reality is statistics will tell you culture will eat strategy every day for lunch. You have to have the right engagement strategy in your organization to execute your plan. So here is an aha moment. Oh, and I should have mentioned, I'm going to send these slides out after the presentation. I'll probably mention this again at the end. So you'll get a copy of the slides. I know you're going to get a copy of the recording, but sometimes it's nice just to search through the slides and find the one that you're interested in. This next little spot is an aha moment. So kind of put your devices down, pay attention, because this is a game changer. There's 3 questions that every single employee asks when they walk in the door. And the way they answer these questions will dictate whether they join your organization, whether they stay, or whether they leave. So let me go through the questions. The first question everyone asks when they walk in the door is, why is this job important to me? And that comes down to things like geography, vocation, location, Studied it in university. Uncle Jim works there. I wanted to work in his company. I always wanted to do that. So it's paycheck, it's benefits package, it's all of the kind of have to have items when a person is looking to get hired into an organization. The second question everyone asks when they walk in the door is, who am I going to work with? What's my boss like? What are my fellow employees like? Who do I interact with every day? Do I interact with internal resources, with bureaucrats, with the community at large, with customers, with suppliers? Who do I spend my day with? What's my boss like? And the third question everyone asks when they walk in the door is, what am I going to be doing? So what am I using my hands, my mind for every day? Now, here's how we answer the questions. And believe me, this has significantly changed between 2023 and 2019, and also significantly changed as more baby boomers are exiting the workforce and more younger people are entering the workforce. So that very first question that they asked, why is this job important to me? It's why they join. They join if you hit the hot buttons: geography, paycheck, benefits package, vocation, location, those types of things. Now, traditionally, I would tell you that once you've done this, once a person has agreed to work for you for a certain amount of money and benefits and so on, you've kind of have them. Everything that happens after that will kind of dictate whether a person, kind of stays or leaves. But what's so different right now is this kind of area is a little bit vulnerable. So you really have to be kind of showing them your appreciation in this area. So, and the reason why this is happening, this is an area right now where people are targeting. So normally I'd say, look, if they agree to come and work for that amount of money, it's everything you do after this that matters. And that's fine for people you're hiring today. But people you hired a year or two ago, and I would normally never say this, it's probably the only time where you might want to be looking at what you're paying people and trying to figure out whether or not you're paying them the right amount of money. I have a family member that's going to, the union is going to come to them on Saturday and say what their new pay raise suggestion is, and they're going to go vote on it. The interesting thing is the union this time around didn't push as hard. In fact, they're probably going to come back with more money than what they thought. And the reason being is the union knows that if they underpay, they're going to start losing their people. In this particular case, it's a massive union, big employer here in Atlantic Canada. They will lose their employees to Western Canada. So they know they're already, $10 per hour below what that person could get paid in Western Canada now. And that pool for them to leave and go back out there would be pretty significant. So this is the reason why people join. The second one, who am I going to be working with? It's the reasons why we stay. We stay if we like the people we work with. Now, there is a myth, and the myth is people don't leave companies or people don't leave their employer. They leave their boss. Statistically, it's not true. People do leave if they have a bad boss. I personally have left companies. Most people on this call have probably left companies sometimes in the past because they didn't like their boss. But the reality is a lot of people stick around even if they dislike their boss. We call that the classroom scenario. And I'll give you maybe a nurse absolutely loves the patients, the parents, maybe they work with children. They love the children. They love their parents. They love their fellow nurses, can't stand their supervisor, hate the shift work, but still come back to work every day. So it is the biggest reasons why people stay. They stay if they like the people they're working with. The number one reasons why people are leaving businesses or employers right now is if you have them doing stuff they don't like doing. So, and what's really interesting about this is we have a whole bunch of people doing stuff right now we actually didn't hire them to do. So when they agreed to come work, and number one, they agreed on the items, the geography, the paycheck and everything. And then number three, you said, here's what your job description is. But then they get in the door and you change everything and you wonder why they're unhappy. The number one reason, and baby boomers did not leave for this reason. Baby boomers are completely okay with not enjoying their job, as long as they were getting the money, the benefits, and all of those things, and maybe they like the people they work with, but they didn't leave for this reason. I remember having a conversation with my father one day and saying, Dad, you know what? I'm looking for a job with purpose. You know what my father said? My dad's originally from Newfoundland, but most of our life. We grew up in Cape Breton. He said, suck it up, buttercup. It's work. It's not supposed to be fun. If you want to have fun, go buy a snowmobile. So for him, you didn't look to work, but the younger your workforce, as more baby boomers are exiting, the more important this one becomes. So I want to kind of start as we wrap up here this afternoon. I want to give you some successful attributes of leadership in 2023. And I bet you there are a lot of people on this call right now didn't believe that I could literally talk for 90 minutes and not even take a breath or say the word or ah at all. So 6 critical attributes of successful leadership in 2023. And the first one, number one thing a leader has to have right now is empathy. You have to be empathetic to the people around you. You have to go beyond your values and look at that of other people. You know, when the pandemic hit and people were sent home to work, I'm in a place in my life right now. It's just my wife and I. We have a beautiful house, and I have a studio. I have a state of the art. My office has 2 32-inch monitors. I have gigabit technology that feeds into my house. So for me, when everyone went home working, I was already there. I didn't have to think about it. But think about the people that, like my children or my friends and their kids. We sent them home and we said, oh, by the way, how about stopping by Best Buy on your way home and pick up a laptop? I'll give you $2,500. And they were sitting in the corner in their kitchen, sharing a Wi-Fi with everyone else in their house while their children were trying to be educated in another room and their spouse was having a Zoom meeting from their bedroom. We have to realize what other people are going through. Even as we come out of the pandemic, their values, their beliefs, do we wear a mask? Do we not wear a mask? Look at it from other people's perspectives. So lead with empathy as you head into the future. Number 2, you're going to have flexibility. I was speaking at a big construction company in Ontario in the fall, and I got on a call with the CEO before we went in. He goes, Eddie, I don't want you talking about that working from home stuff because we don't believe in that. And I'm like, that's okay. But, the reality is you've just locked yourself out of 50% of the workforce and you're leaving my daughter will tell you, she is a recruiter. She will tell you if you say publicly that it's mandatory for everyone come to work, the headhunters will descend on your organization and pick at it. So think of flexibility. Think of that company in the US that has a shift from 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock to accommodate people to be able to drop their kids off and pick their kids up. I think it's Ganong, and I could be wrong. It's one of the chocolate manufacturers have 23 different shifts a week to be able to accommodate everyone's needs. So be open to new ways of doing things. Maybe it's hybrid, but flexibility goes deep. If you're in an environment where you maybe own trucks or cars, or maybe you have cars that you keep for 4 or 5 years, all your maintenance is in the last year or two, but you can't find mechanics anymore, then maybe you've got to be looking at the technology. Maybe you keep your vehicles for 3 years. Maybe you have a hybrid work environment or a car or electric car that has less maintenance or so on. So be very, very flexible to new ways of doing things into the future. Truthfulness and trust. The younger your workforce, the more they distrust their leadership. And a lot of that was because younger generations didn't like what they saw with baby boomers. They didn't like WorldCon and Enron. Heck, we even put Martha Stewart in prison for a while. So they didn't like the fact of the way that baby boomers necessarily ran the planet. And that's why you're seeing so much right now around the global warming and corruption and so on, that younger people bring that to the forefront. So the best way to augment truthfulness and trust is to have more transparency and open communication in your organization. Have absolute clarity on what the goals are. By definition, an employee cannot be engaged if they don't know what it is they're trying to achieve. So that's leveraging their individual strength, aligning it with the goals. So you have to have clarity on what the goal is, and that should be repetitious within the organization. Whatever you were doing for communication prior to the pandemic, it should be double right now. Communication, the younger the workforce, again, the more communication is critical. And the reason for that, baby boomers, I remember going to my father one day and saying, Dad, who was that? And my father would say, no, my dad was really cool. Like really, he loved me very, very much. We had a fantastic relationship. But I said, Dad, who was that? And he goes, kids should be seen, not heard. So But our children grew up very different. You know, we shared with them everything, the price of our cars, how much the power bill was. And I grew up, I didn't know any of that stuff. So when they go to work, they expect you to have that same level of communication. Empower people. We literally sent people home with a notebook and wondered why they didn't have all the tools. So especially if you are in a hybrid work environment, maybe some working from home, but the key now as we get less employees is to empower people more to be able to do their job. So if I think it's Towers Watson, they look at disengaged employees and Fortune 500 companies, 9% operating margin. Engaged employees, 14% operating margin, so 5 points. Highly engaged, empowered, and engaged employees, 27% operating margin. So give them the tools they need to be able to effectively do it. I want to wrap up with just a couple slides here, and then we're going to kind of hit the button right at the top of the hour here, and we'll do so. Get your Q&A ready. I'm going to wrap up here in about 60 seconds or so. 3 steps to closing the engagement gap. The first step, you've got to get to know the people that you're working with better. The second step, you've got to develop them. So developing them means that you're going to leverage their individual strength and aligning it with the goals in your organization. And I believe in your particular case, if you're a leader, you have to motivate them. And I work with executives and CEOs, I mean, literally by the thousands across the country and into the US. If you don't think your employees are watching you, they're watching everything you're doing. They're watching when you show up. They're watching what you say, how you treat people, how you speak, what's on your social media feed, and everything you're doing, you're telling your employees that that's okay, that they can do the same thing. I want to dig into the first one just with a couple slides when we look at getting to know people. There's 3 things you should be looking at in getting to know people. And it's really, really critical, the younger your workforce. So the first is to get to know people based on gender and their communication styles based on their gender. So we just took the 2 main genders in the workplace right now. We would have more women working than we would have men, and their values, communication styles across the genders would be very, very different. The second thing you want to look at would be culture. And culture, I don't mean from the perspective of engagement culture. In this case, I mean from the perspective of immigration. And a number I'm just going to throw out there, every single new job in Canada is going to be filled by somebody who's currently not living in our country. So we've already hit the tipping point where there's not enough people living in Canada. All of our growth now has to happen. We will become a super diverse country in the world. So embrace that into your organization and open communication across the culture. And the very last thing, and this literally would be a 3-hour presentation on its own, and we do this as a presentation, is 5 generations working in the workplace together. We've never experienced anything like this before. It's the biggest disruptor in the workplace. You've got to get to know the people based on their age, and the way we've managed people in the past is not going to work in the future. So I am going to unshare.
And can you hear me, Eddie?
I can hear you.
Well, perfect. While Eddie is unsharing, I'll do a very brief thank you because we have lots of question and answers to get to. So while Eddie is having a break and a very much needed glass of water, on behalf of our sponsor, the Government of Saskatchewan, I'm going to play a message from the Honourable Everett Hindley. Just bear with me here, folks.
Good afternoon for attending today, and thanks to Eddie for his presentation to the group. I'm Everett Hindley, MLA for Swift Current and the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Seniors, and Rural and Remote Health. And on behalf of the Minister of Immigration and Career Training, Jeremy Harrison, very pleased to join you virtually today as we close out this session here this afternoon. As we start this new year, I'm sure many of you, myself included, are looking ahead. And if 2022 is any sort of indicator, we have good reason to be optimistic
Sorry, when you muted yourself, you muted everything. None of us can hear.
Sorry, folks. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I'm terribly sorry about
Good afternoon, and thanks to everyone for attending today, and thanks to Eddie for his presentation to the group. I'm Everett Hindley, MLA for Swift Current and the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Seniors, and Rural and Remote Health. And on behalf of the Minister of Immigration and Career Training, Jeremy Harrison, very pleased to join you virtually today as we close out this session here this afternoon. As we start this new year, I'm sure many of you, myself included, are looking ahead. And if 2022 is any sort of indicator, we have good reason to be optimistic about 2023. Saskatchewan saw remarkable growth in the past year, and our government is working to ensure that this growth continues to work for everyone. This is a result of strong economic growth and approximately $10 billion in private sector capital investments that began back in early 2021. In fact, Saskatchewan's GDP is set to lead the nation in economic growth, driven largely by commodities and also the energy sector, both being large contributors to provincial exports. And in recent months, Saskatchewan has shown strong growth in several key economic indicators, such as building construction, manufacturing sales, and wholesale trade. The risks of recession, inflation, and supply chain challenges are real, but as producers of some of the safest, highest quality products in the world, Saskatchewan businesses are vital pieces in meeting future demands both nationally but also internationally as well. Foreign markets are counting on Saskatchewan to provide the food, fuel, and the fertilizer the countries need to grow in the years ahead. Between 2022 and 2026, projections indicate that the province will have about 135,000 new job opportunities, resulting from economic expansion and the replacement of retiring workers. And just recently, Saskatchewan announced a quarterly population increase of 22,000 people, boosting our provincial population total to 1.2 million people for the first time ever. And at the current rate of growth, Saskatchewan is expected to reach 1.4 million people by the end of 2030. To help meet the needs of employers looking to train new employees, our government launched the Reskill Saskatchewan Training Subsidy. And our government has also recently introduced the Labor Mobility and Fair Practices Registration Regulations, which will reduce the regulatory burden professionally trained newcomers face when they're coming to Saskatchewan for employment. Our government is working to provide a labor market for your businesses so you can continue to operate, succeed, and grow into the future. With a lower cost of living compared to other jurisdictions, improvements to labor mobility, and a wide variety of employment opportunities, Saskatchewan is undoubtedly a great place to live, work, play, and also raise a family. And I'm very pleased to say that Saskatchewan is now stronger than ever. Thanks once again for your participation today, and all the best in 2023.
Well, perfect. And many thanks again back to the Government of Saskatchewan, the Ministry of Immigration and Career Training. We very much appreciate you sponsoring the event today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take questions from the chat. And just so you folks know, we are going to respect everyone's time, of course. So if we don't get through all the questions by 1:30, I will email them to Eddie and send you all out the responses as well as the PDF of the slide deck.
Perfect.
So let me see here. Let's go for a question from Jordan. Eddie, what would you say is the #1 driver of the lack of skilled workers in Canada and or Saskatchewan?
So the number one, I think that, well, it's hard to pinpoint it, but the #1 reasons why we have such a skill shortage right now is the aging demographics. We're losing a tremendous amount of people out of the workforce through retirement every single week. And I think the second one would be we've lagged behind on immigration. So the numbers didn't matter as much until we got to where we are right now. If you were to look at that graph that I had, the baby boomers, increasing by 76% between the ages of 55 and 64. And at the other side of it, when we look at the 15-year-olds, it was almost non-existent. If you look at the same thing in the United States, the young people would be much higher because they brought more immigrants in than the past. And so they're not going to be faced with the same challenge we are. But the aging population is the biggest deal that we have right now.
Thanks, Eddie. Here's a question from Dina Beige from our Newcomer Center here in Swift Current. Newcomers are often asked for a Canadian work experience when they are just trying to start their work experience here in Canada. What should employers be asking instead?
Yeah, we really have some shortcomings when it comes to bringing people in from other countries. I travel extensively. You would not believe how many times an Uber driver that I get in the car with has an electrical engineering degree or a PhD. We have to learn to be able to integrate their skills from other countries into our workforce faster, or we're going to become a soft landing for other countries. So we'll see immigrants move into Canada and stay here for a short period of time, only to find themselves in the United States or one of the other G7 countries. So you really have to look at ways of integrating them into your workforce, not looking for that Canadian experience. I mean, you literally probably can't hire somebody from Manitoba as a dental assistant to work in Saskatchewan, and that's why we struggle so much with bringing someone in from another country. So to integrate them as fast as you can, and to utilize the skills that they bring into the country. But this is a much bigger question, and it's a very political question on how we can leverage the skills that other people bring into Canada. So it's a little hard one for me to ask or answer.
Okay, I appreciate that. Here's one from Randy Jaworski. Many university graduates may not be aligned to a specific occupation. They're not acquiring the skills and competencies deemed needed by employers, thus are not aligned to employers' occupations they are seeking to fill. So in tandem with that, Jackie asks, what can the education system do to better align with the future job market?
Yeah, and that's another. University students that are coming out of school right now are going to find work. If they don't find it in your community, they're going to find it in another community, whether they have to move out of Saskatchewan into another community or whether they work remotely. So a lot of organizations will look at university graduates and gobble them up now before they kind of even exit. What we're talking about here, or what I think the question really is, how do you align the requirements within the province of Saskatchewan with people that are graduating from your educational system? And the key is to really, you're going to have to get to the high schools or almost even the junior high schools and kind of position yourself as the industry that you want people to be able to work in as they come out. And I'll give you a simple little example. I spoke at a boaters association in Vancouver just before the holidays, and it's a really cool industry. People would love to work in it, but they're now going into junior high and high schools promoting their industry. So it's really, you got to get post-secondary education. And in your particular case, especially in provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta and Manitoba, it's really more the trades. Like, how do you really encourage people to take trades? Because that's where the big money is right now. I'm going to throw a number out that I found fascinating, but I was in Whitecourt just before the holidays, and one of the gentleman's son is working in BC as a heavy-duty mechanic, making $50,000 a month. So it's really aligning what you need in the workforce with what the education system, and you got to work more in tandem and hand in hand with each other.
Thanks, Eddie. This is a question from Andrea. For someone who is hiring right now and having a difficult time filling that position, do you recommend utilizing the services of a professional recruiting firm?
That's a great question. So my daughter's a recruiter, and it's funny, her and I had a conversation yesterday, and she has doubled her income in 2 years from when she got now to where she is right now. And in Canada right now, there are 14,000 vacancies for headhunters. And that's companies hiring headhunters because they can't find people anymore. So they're looking to hire headhunters to be able to hire people. And it gives you a sense for how desperate organizations, I spoke at a group just recently and they said, Eddie, I need to know, where do I run an ad to get somebody? And the reality is there's no real place to run an ad anymore. If you want someone, you have to go get them. So, I believe very heavy in headhunters. I think that recruiters are a great way to get people. Just that you have to get one that'll work for you. That because the market is going to be flooded with recruiters, and some of them are going to have less experience than the human resource managers that are hiring the recruiters. So it's probably a necessary thing in the future, but you really have to kind of look through at who you're using as a recruiter as well.
Okay, and further to that, I'll remind everyone on the call that SAS Jobs has excellent resources for all of us to utilize. So plug that into Google and have a look.
And I want to throw something else out there. Some of the conferences that I'm at, there's really, really cool other presenters that are industry presenters that are talking about how they're recruiting people. A lot of people are turning their websites into a recruiting tools now, as opposed to websites talking about their products and services. And they're doing TikTok videos, social media things. There's some really, really cool stuff being done right now on what makes the organization the right place for somebody to work at. So it's not just about money anymore. It's about building that culture in your organization and having them help you recruit people as well.
Okay, that leads excellent into this next question, Eddie. Thank you. First of them, what is the most important factor with respect to retention, do you feel? Is it wage, company culture, job security, or is there something else that should be at the very top of the list?
What is at the very top of the list is meaningful work. So if you've hired someone, you've paid them the right amount of money, so you paid kind of the industry average, what they would earn if they'd gone anywhere else, then that's table stakes. That's done. People stay in organizations if they like the people they're working with. So if you have bad leadership, bad managers, mean employees, people that don't integrate well into an organization, obviously that is a reason why people stay. But the number one reasons why people are leaving organizations is if they're doing things that they don't like doing at work. So, and I remember when I started my own business and we were struggled the first year, and I've been doing this since 2005, the first year we struggled, and I said, maybe I'll just go find a job. And I started looking at all of the job descriptions, and I'm like, well, God, if I did that stuff in my own organization, I wouldn't be looking for a job right now. So it's really aligning the strengths of employees. Now, there's a simple little exercise you can do, and if everyone on this call does this, believe me, it'll change the whole work environment. There are those days when you're walking home at the end of the day, you just feel like $1 million, like the day just flew by. Well, if you do this little exercise every day for the next 14 days, at the end of the day, write on a piece of paper, have your whole staff do it. At the end of the day, write on a piece of paper, what did I do today that I truly enjoyed doing, that made me feel good, that gave me energy, that fulfilled me? And what did I do today that made me feel tired, dragged out, lethargic? And what'll happen is over a period of 2 weeks, you'll get a pattern. And if your employees are only doing things they dislike doing every day, one of two things are going to happen. They're either going to quit or they're going to become disengaged, and hopefully not actively disengaged, become destructive in your organization. But if your employees are doing things they enjoy doing more, then they're more likely to stay. Now, there's a magic number, don't walk away from this call thinking, oh, well, all I got to do is do stuff I like doing and I'm going to be happy. The number is 20%. So if your employees are doing things they truly love doing 20% of the time, there's a very good chance they'll stay and they'll be more engaged. The higher the number, the better. But if at the end of 14 days, you look at the number, and then it's a great management tool because then you can look at it and say, I'm going to get this person doing more things that engage them because that increased capacity and productivity in the organization.
Love it. Great idea, Eddie. Second question, what do you think is the main factor causing an employee to go from that highly engaged pillar to the actively disengaged?
Well, sometimes in an organization, it could be conflict, but 90% of the time when people go from being super engaged in an organization to not engage is we start to align them with tasks that they don't like doing. So we move them away from the things that truly engage them and makes them happy. And then they move into things that make them unhappy. We saw a lot of that happen during the pandemic. We literally sent people home to work in an environment that they didn't want to be doing, or doing things that they didn't want to do. And the other thing is, I don't want to underestimate this. When you walk home at the end of the day, if you're not already at home right now working from home, your dog, when you walk in the door, goes nuts, right? Like they show that level of gratitude and love for you. And they're basically sitting there thinking, I thought you were gone forever. And they're just so, and then you get there and you go, oh my goodness, I forgot the laptop. You walk back out to the car, you walk back in, your dog goes all crazy. If you get nothing out of my presentation today except one thing, when your employees walk in that door tomorrow, start wagging your tail and show them the love, because we are so far past a place where your employees, where you're doing them a favor by hiring them, they're actually doing you a favor by coming back. And showing that level of gratitude and appreciation for your employees goes a long way at keeping them as well.
Great reminder. Thanks, Eddie. Gail asks, what importance should employers place on pension and benefit plans? So many employers do not offer this. Is it a real problem?
No, it's not. And that's a great question. So it depends on your person. So the baby boomers love defined pension. They love pensions. They love the, collective agreements, all of those types of things. The average 22-year-old, if you think about when you walk in the door, everyone has something different they're looking for. I'm 60 years old. When I walk in the door, it's probably not going to be about the money for me. It might be more about giving back at this stage of my life. You actually see a lot of executives, they kind of retire from their jobs and they go to the community college and teach, because that's a big part of what they want to do. They want to give back. But the 22-year-old that's walking in the door that has $80,000 in student loan debt, wants to get married next year, has a car payment, would love to have a down payment on a house, defined pension and those things, that's the furthest thing from their mind. Or you telling them that you work really hard in 6 months, you're going to get a bonus. So the younger the workforce, the less important that becomes to them. It's more about what am I getting right now, because that's what I need right now. So, it's a bit of a hard question, but I think if you were to poll your younger employees, you'll find that that's not what's driving them. If I was to talk to my 65-year-old brother, defined pension is the best thing ever invented. So it depends on the age group, but we have a younger workforce right now. And they're very mobile. So a defined pension and popping from one company to another doesn't really work either, right? So baby boomers on average change their careers 3 times in their life. Younger people will change their careers every 3 to 5 years for the rest of their lives. So, RSP might not be bad because they'll take that with them, but defined pension is not going to be as big a deal in the future. Nor is a collective agreement, because a collective agreement is going to be an Achilles heel for a lot of organizations, because it'll prevent them from giving employees individual things. So every employee that walks in the door is going to want something different. So a collective agreement could hurt you in the future.
Good point.
Interesting.
Any tips or advice to working with a leadership team that's resistant to change? So this individual finds it hard to implement new ideas once it gets shot down by the higher ups that aren't willing to admit there is a problem and change is needed. So working within that, how do you affect change?
Yeah, that is such a difficult question to answer. A number of years ago, I was in Ottawa at the Adobe Center, and there was 85 human resource managers there from companies around Ottawa area. And somebody said to me, they said, well, my CEO doesn't believe in the whole employee engagement thing. And, when will they make a change? And I said, when they walk out of their office and the cubicles are empty. And I think that's, some people are just so stubborn that they don't want to make change, or they're closer to, maybe they're older, or they're closer to the retirement. And I don't know the scenario of that person individually, but, give more information, give more facts. But I think when you start seeing your people walking out the door, going somewhere else, you're going to realize that's why I do the scare the bejeebers part of my presentation. It's literally so you'll understand the challenges as we go forward. And I feel your pain. I've been in environments where you want to do things and you just can't seem to push it up the ladder.
Excellent. So working with our newcomer center, this is a common theme that for newcomers to Canada, the transfer of their skills and qualifications is slow and costly and a significant barrier. Any ideas, thoughts on how to improve that going into the future?
You know, that is a big issue. And it's why we're seeing, we see a couple of things happen in Canada. One is we'll see people integrate into a community only to stay there a very short period of time because they culturally don't fit into a community. You see that a lot in rural areas. So now we're seeing rural areas embrace families better. So not just the person that somebody's hiring to bring into their organization, but their family. So integrate them into the schools and the churches and the shopping malls and so on. But what tends to happen is people will move into smaller centers, stay for a short period of time, and then make their way to larger centers across Canada where they can get integrated into the community a little bit better and their skills can be used more. So this isn't a problem that immigration has. This is a problem that really government and employers have on using that skill faster and coming up with policies that allow us to be able to use a skill from another country and even another province for that matter. Is you're trying to recruit people, you know, when you played your thank you video and you're talking about the jobs being created, the amount of people that are exiting your population, you're going to have to recruit people from other provinces and you're going to need their skill set as well to work in your province. So again, it's a big question. We just have to figure that one out.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, who works with Partners in Employment here in Swift Current, comments that individuals with barriers and disabilities are a hugely underutilized group of people that job seekers are overlooking. Any ideas outside, you know, to further and remind employers? Any ideas that you have, Eddie?
Yeah, so, and that is a very underutilized population in Canada. So I've worked with the Alberta Abilities Association folks there, and I've done extensive work with Nova Scotia Abilities, and I presented on behalf of Nova Scotia Abilities to employers on the benefits of bringing people in. But I've also worked with folks with disabilities within the province in building their self-confidence to go for those jobs. But I think the key right now is that this is a prime time, and it is a perfect time to utilize people with disabilities in the workplace. So I think employers are much more open to it now. A big part of this is going to be educating the employers of what they have to offer in the employment sector. And I don't know how much you work with other provinces, but we are seeing organizations of people with disabilities doing really, really good jobs in some of the provinces right now.
Mm-hmm. Great. Shannon asks, how do you attract newcomers when you are in a small rural community? We've got people joining us from all over Saskatchewan here on the call today, some rural, some in the bigger centers. Many would say they would like the job, they just don't want to drive, because obtaining a driver's license in Canada can be a significant barrier as well.
Well, you know, tonight I'm taking my 27-year-old son out to drive because he is just getting his license because he is finding it a barrier to enter the workforce as well. So I feel your pain from that perspective. Younger people are putting driving off in a lot of cases. You know, it really is, how do you attract people into your community? When I moved to Alberta, I wanted to be close to an airport, so Calgary was kind of what I was thinking, but I didn't want to live in Calgary, so I lived in Cochrane because of the lifestyle in Cochrane, Alberta. It was a smaller community. So I really promote the community, but I think, you know, some of the things that smaller communities have to start looking at now is, you know, fiber internet connections, bandwidth, to be able to have people live in those communities and work remotely and vice versa. So, you know, I live in an area right here that's fairly affluent neighborhood, or maybe it wasn't always, but it is now. 30% of all homes in our neighborhood in the last couple of years were sold to people from Ontario that are working remotely. So they really drove the price of housing up in my neighborhood, but the infrastructure is here to allow them to work remotely. So, how do you recruit people in your community, that lifestyle, that want to live in your community? And then if they are people in your community you're trying to keep in your community, how do you build an infrastructure to allow them to stay there? And maybe if they're not working in your community, work outside. Because even if they're living in your community and working outside of the community, there's still an economic benefit to that. They're spending money in the coffee shops and local shops and that type of scenario as well. Urbanization, this is an issue right across North America. People are leaving small centers, moving into the cities. You really have to work at keeping people in the smaller communities right now.
Excellent. Thanks, Eddie. Sharon commented that they are rural and they have done, I think it's the SNIP, and then newcomers will commit to a few years. So I think the key, correct me if I'm wrong, Eddie, would be to make sure that those people are truly welcomed and integrated into our communities.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I'm seeing this, we see rural Alberta and the northern part of the province have done a really good job at this, because I literally travel across Canada quite extensively, so I get to see what everyone's doing. Rural Alberta realized this a few years ago when they had areas, when you get a jobless rate at 5%, you're fully employed. That means that the people that live in that community don't match the jobs that they're looking for. So there were areas where the jobless rate were down around 1.5% to 2.5%. And they realized that when they were bringing people in from other countries to integrate them into those communities, that their family didn't feel welcome. So they started putting programs in place to integrate the families into those remote communities as well. So that's something you might want to look at in the future as well, as how not just the employees you're bringing in, but how are you integrating the families as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't see any new questions and it's 1:29. So to be mindful of time, I think we'll wrap that up today. I want to extend a very sincere thank you once again to the Government of Saskatchewan, Ministry of Immigration and Career Training, and SAS Jobs, which is a great resource that we have here in our fair province. Thank you so much, Mr. Eddie LeMoine. You've given us many great things to think about, practices to implement, many of which I had not thought of, and I'm sure going to take away from this. We have many great resources in Saskatchewan, your local chambers, SAS Jobs. We have many different avenues and partners to work with, including our newcomer welcome centers, our partners in employment, Sask Abilities. I wish you all well. This is a great way to kick off 2023. Happy New Year. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will be emailing out the PDF slide deck, and the recording will be available on our website by Friday. So Eddie, thank you so very much from the Prairie Provinces here, and we wish you well into the future.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.